The Whale. So The Whale is a film that's classed as the comeback film for actor Brendan Fraser, and I know beyond this film itself there's a lot of context around it, such as everything that happened with Brendan Fraser in his personal life and how much the performance really kind of almost is a representation of him to a certain degree. And when you look at the nature of the film, a lot of people will turn around and say that it's going to touch a few nerves, that it's going to make people very emotional, and that it might actually draw a little bit of criticism. And all those things are true to a certain degree, even though there are some things I do agree with and some things I don't agree with. That being said, I knew because it was a film being made by Darren Aronofsky, whose career I feel is a little bit of a mixed bag for me, because he's done some very good films over the past couple of years, such as Black Swan and The Wrestler. But he's also done some others that are a little bit like, I'm not entirely sure, such as his most recent one before this one, Mother. So because it's the next Aronofsky film and it's starring Brendan Fraser in his comeback film, there was a lot of expectation for this one. Because clearly it was going to be about as emotional to watch on the screen as it would be to imagine and think about it when you think about the context outside of the screen and what things happen beyond that. So The Whale follows obese and reclusive English teacher called Charlie, who tries to reconnect with his estranged teenage daughter for one last chance at redemption. Now, as I've already mentioned, the film has been directed by Darren Aronofsky, even though the story's actually been written by Samuel Hunter. And Aronofsky has done some pretty gut-wrenching films in the past where he's made you kind of feel disgusted and very, uncomfortable when watching it. And in this case, instead of tugging at the stomach, it's tugging at the heart. It was so heart-wrenching to watch. The story was just so emotional. And there are things in terms of representation in this film that have drawn criticism, which I will address. Particularly the way in which the state of being obese has been claimed to have been represented as somewhat abject and disgusting. And supposedly the ways in which the film body shames people. Now, we've seen various different representations of how director Darren Aronofsky portrays the human body. We saw that in Black Swan, we've seen that in The Wrestler, we've seen that in Requiem for a Dream, we've seen that in The Phantom, we've seen that in Mother, and now this one focuses on it too. But I just feel that the story uses obesity and its representation of it as a sideline for the general overall emotions of what the character feels. Because after all, the film is called The Whale, and yes, that refers to an extremely large animal, but here it's used as a metaphor, because yes, the film focuses on a man who is severely overweight, but it does it in a very poetic kind of way in which it's part of a story in which it kind of is not really about his weight at all. It's more so about the relationship. And when you watch the film, you'll know what I mean by that. And I also know that Darren Aronofsky likes to add a lot of religious themes in his films, particularly in recent times with Noah and with Mother. And he does exactly the same thing here, but more so on a moral level, I feel. Because in previous Aronofsky films that we've had, we've seen religious characters being brought into the film. We've seen them in the flesh, or we've seen them as a metaphor for something. But in this case, it's more so about faith. And I think the faith side of religion is used in this film to generate self-awareness on part of the character by other characters talking openly about it towards him. So in that respect, I think it was about encouraging people to reflect on their own life, and that's what this film is about. Because ultimately the story is about regret and grief and how we're trying to atone from one's mistakes. It's a film that I don't think shames a person's weight. I think it's more a case of a film about a guy who has got to such an extremely low point in his life in which the only comfort he can turn to alongside his job is food, and that's his outlet. And of course, naturally, when you have a lot of that, it's going to have a lot of risk factors and health consequences. And I feel that representation is absolutely fine, because we've had films in the past that have talked about people who've been addicted to alcohol, gambling, sex and drugs, and this one is almost exactly the same, but it's just being addicted to food. I think one thing that the film does touch upon in terms of shaming body weight is of course the moments in which he is paranoid about what his students would think of his appearance. But personally, I think it shows people's ignorance, because it's not always about what's on the outside that judges a person, it's what's on the inside. And I'm sure many of us out there have experienced or can empathise with people who've been in that situation, right? And I know the story is very deep and it will cause a few stirs from a lot of people and that it will touch a few nerves, but I think overall, I think it justifies a lot of things in terms of what it's trying to achieve and what it's trying to show, while also just being a film to just sit and enjoy watching. And when you think about the ways that this film was made, Darren Aronofsky is truly one of the most visionary directors I think we've ever seen in film. This one is very different because there's not really many visuals at all, really, because it's entirely set in one room on a very low budget. I mean, if you can class $3 million as a low budget these days, that's absolutely insane. But the point I'm making is that because the film is obviously called The Whale, and that's of course a metaphor like I've already mentioned, I think the visionary side of what we know Darren Aronofsky for is not necessarily presented in front of us. It's either subtly hinted or it's just left us to imagine. And sometimes that's often better, because it's those visionary things that we try and imagine in our minds that really kind of are a part of Charlie's relationship with his daughter. And because the film is set in Charlie's house almost 99.9% of the time, it's something that really shows Charlie's isolation from within society, and to a degree creates mystery on part of the other characters who just wander into his house, because we don't know all that much context about who they really are and where they come from. And that's what I thought was interesting about The Whale being set predominantly in Charlie's house. And now onto Charlie himself. A part of the controversy around him was the fact that Brendan Fraser wore a fat suit and they put prosthetics and makeup on him. And I thought the hair and makeup on him was absolutely brilliant, and he almost looked completely unrecognisable. And Brendan Fraser's performance as Charlie is truly unlike anything that we've seen from him so far. And what a comeback this film was for him. Because when you look back to the 1990s and the 2000s, he was perceived as someone who was just a very popular movie star rather than being a very talented actor. And when you watch this film, you'll know how much that perception is totally spun on its head, and that it truly unleashes Brendan's true capability and talent as an actor. And yes, I've mentioned about the criticism about him being in a fat suit, but I just think that's the art of acting. And to be honest, he had me pretty convinced, purely because of how emotional and raw his performance was. And I think on a very personal level, why Brendan Fraser was such a perfect match for this character was that I think you could see a lot of Brendan Fraser's life and what he's been through in relation to the Charlie character, because Brendan went through a very depressed phase in his life in which he lost a parent, and there were just a lot of other things that kind of escalated and just boiled over that sank him into this Great Depression phase in his life. And that's why a lot of people saw this film as his comeback film. But because of that middle-aged depression that Brendan was going through and what Charlie's going through, I think in this performance, the real Brendan Fraser came out. You really saw him in this character. And I think that's what's truly the most authentic part of this film, because it was about Brendan's own emotions that he spills into this performance. Sometimes a lot of actors are able to do that, but I think it means a whole lot more if it's an actor who's gone through something somewhat similar to the character that he's playing. I think what sums it up for me is the fact that at premieres of the film, they had a 6-minute standing ovation and Brendan was crying on stage. And when Brendan's gone to collect an award for his performance in this film, he's done the exact same thing, in which he stood up on stage and got very emotional and overwhelmed. And as good as Austin Butler was in Elvis, I really do hope, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, that Brendan Fraser gets his hands on that Oscar, because I think he completely and utterly deserves it. Now, even though Brendan Fraser as Charlie completely stole the film and gave such a terrific performance, there were other actors in this film who did a fantastic job as well. The role of Charlie's daughter Ellie was Stranger Things actress Sadie Sink, and she was absolutely fantastic in this film as well. And through this character, you just got so many different emotions, because she was a typical teenager who didn't know how to behave properly and just had an overwhelming amount of emotions going through her head at any one time. Because she was conflicted about her relationship with her dad, she was angry and resentful towards him for that paternal abandonment. She was emotional because she almost wanted to fix that relationship. And from an individual point of view, she was very confused about how to look at the world because of everything that's happened during her childhood. I'm sure a lot of people will empathise with teenagers who have gone through something similar to what Ellie has gone through, right? And I feel that Sadie Sink's chemistry with Brendan Fraser in this film was a really, really good one, because they had that real strong emotional connection, both on an angry level and on a very personal and emotional one as well. We also saw Hong Chow as Liz, someone else who's received acclaim for her performance and has received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. And just like Charlie and just like Ellie, I feel that the character of Liz is someone who a lot of people can relate to as well, because she is somebody who is somewhat of an outsider in the context of the bigger picture in the situation, which is of Charlie and what he's gone through and his relationship with his daughter. But equally, she is Charlie's closest and almost only friend. She's the one who's seeing him go through this. And there's almost a reason for it, because she has that emotional connection with him. It's almost like being somebody who is looking after or tending to their elderly parent while in the twilight of their lives. And again, I'm pretty sure that's something that almost everybody can relate to. And I think through Hong Chow's performance, you could just feel that significance, and that's what makes her performance special as well. So overall, The Whale is a film film that, despite the criticism around it, which I have addressed in this video, on an emotional level there is a lot to take in, because it does touch a lot of nerves, and I'm sure it's bound to provoke a lot of audience members in numerous different ways. And the film's particular strength is the acting, and that is huge credit to Brendan Fraser and Sadie Sink and Hong Chow, and it is a film that is bound to touch at your heartstrings. So what did you think of The Whale? Do you think that the criticisms around it were fair? Did you enjoy the performances from Brendan Fraser, Sadie Sink and Hong Chow? And did you actually think that it was a film that really kind of provoked those emotions and made us all kind of reflect on our own lives? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, if you did go on to enjoy this video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more, and have a notification bell ticked so you're notified when I upload a new video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care everybody.